or 201, we're gonna take some time. This is pretty much a photographic or picture survey of some of the more in-depth details from the class on Tuesday. So just some ways to kind of level up what you might be doing instead of the basic pieces that we were using. So we're gonna go there. I know there were some questions about construction from Tuesday. So if we're looking at this, all of the dresses, all of the layers, men's and women's, were constructed fairly similarly, okay? You had basic pieces here. This is sideways, so I could make it a little bit bigger. Can you guys see my arrow if I'm drawing on the screen? Okay, so this is the body panel. Depending on what fabric I have to use, sometimes I don't. Sometimes I just let it be one panel that goes all the way from the floor in the front to the floor in the back with no shoulder seams. Just makes my life a little easier, right? It's one seam I don't have to do and one seam I don't have to finish. But if I don't have a piece of fabric that long and I'm using, I need to, then I'll put in the shoulder seam. But so you have rectangular body panel, one or two pieces. This is that trapezoidal gore that I talked about. So you can see that it's not a triangle shape, and the width at the top of the trapezoid matches the width of the gusset. Okay, this can be one or two pieces. If you are trying to conserve fabric and somehow you ended up with two pieces you can put together to make the trapezoid, go for it. If, however, you have enough fabric to make it a solid piece, you can do that. Okay, but it does, the top here does match whatever your gusset width is. For my husband, they tend to be bigger because he's bigger than me, okay? He's a big guy through the chest, and he likes a lot of movement through the shoulder. And so I make his gores and his gussets a little bit wider, sometimes up to 6 inches, depending. Mine tend to be, you can see here, mine tend to run 3 to 4, depending on how much play I want and what garment I'm making. Here's your gusset. It's a square that matches the top width here. And then here's your sleeve. Standard sleeve, right? It's a trapezoid. No curves, you know, take whatever arm side measurement is going to be comfortable for you in the shoulder. Go down to your wrist measurement. Make sure that wherever your bent elbow is going to be, that you have enough right around here that you're going to comfortably be able to bend your elbow, and then the gusset gets attached. Here in this gore, you also come, so this gets cut 3 inches down then, so that you can fit this in, okay? Because it fits in with this corner right here. Whoops. This corner fits in right here in between where this is cut, and then it opens up. And I'm going to show you that in a second.
To be clear, you mean the top of the trapezoid gets cut down 3 centimeters down in the center.
The trapezoid gets cut down about the same width as that gusset on this line right here, so it can be inserted. This here is just my neck piece. This is for a stand-up collar. This piece here, whatever dimension your neck is, and then however high you want it to be. Most of the collars were not super tall. So we're not talking about something that's going to fit like a turtleneck. Think more of like a mock turtleneck, right? Anywhere from 1/2 inch to maybe 1.5 inches at the outside, okay? here's what that gusset looks like inserted into the gore. So this is the gore that's been split at the top. Here is that gusset. The corners inserted at the bottom, okay? And then over here, you can see how it attaches to the sleeve. So I attach the gusset to the gore first. Then I attach this whole piece here to the sleeve. And then I sew one big seam all the way from the bottom up over the shoulder and down the back. It's just easier for me that way. If I have a shoulder seam, obviously I put the back and front pieces together first. Okay, so that's how I do it. There is no right or wrong way. Some people decide to put the gusset into the sleeve first, and that works for them. For me, it makes it more complicated. Okay. All right, and this is just one of the ones that I'm supposed to be working up for myself. Shocking, I don't sew for myself ever, but I have fabric that I bought for myself. So I should do these things. Okay. All right, so moving into the decoration, I just wanted to get some of the construction stuff out of the way. Decoration. Now, when I say clothing decoration, we're going to take in anything that could have been done to the pieces of fabric in order to make it more. Okay, so just as like your topmost tier, this would have been princely class. These are all the things that you could do to fabric to make it, to decorate it. Now, some of this is later period than us, and you can tell that by this right here. This is a Muscovite sleeve. This is not a Kievan Rus sleeve. This sleeve did not come into play, and neither did this. You see how this is open all the way down the front? That did not come in until the Muscovites. Okay, you can see these are closer to what we would have found in Kiev, where, and this is very Byzantine, this red one on the side here with the very long flowing sleeves. Okay, this one is much closer to what we would have found in Kiev. I will eat when I'm done.
I just need to know how much to leave.
I told the girls to save me some.
Well, nobody said anything.
Okay. Sorry, they made dinner and they're supposed to save me food. But the children are not talking to the husband and like, because nobody can do anything without me. Anyway, sorry. So this is like your blingiest bling ever. All right. It has all the pieces. You can see that the fabrics are probably brocaded or printed. You can see that this is either embroidered in gold work or done in a different brocade. These are probably mostly silks because they are figured fabrics. Okay. These are from one of the books that was written on medieval Russian clothing. I don't remember the name of it right now. It is ubiquitous. If you go look for it, it is out there. A lot of times these pictures show up as black and white line drawings. This is the colored version. This is just a random photograph. You can see this is a block printed center. This piece, this is where we can see that a lot of the different pieces and styles were borrowed from the Byzantines. And I'll show you that in a second, but this is directly borrowed from that style. Okay, so let's talk embroidery. They have found, these are all extant pieces. These are drawings of extant pieces over here. There is a citation down at the bottom on the book that it is from. It's in Russian. I cannot translate that for you. Aveline can. It's very small at the bottom of the slide. And I can tell you that I got all of these pictures are on my Pinterest board. They just live there. So I go and I find wonderful things and I just pop them in where they go into all of the boards. And this is an example of gold work with the pearls. So pearls, ubiquitous, I mean, everywhere. The later periods, there were more pearls, but you definitely, even in the early periods, lots and lots of pearls. And you see, these are not perfectly round. So there was some use of the Baroque or freshwater pearls as well. And then this is all gold work embroidery. Okay. You can see this is a mural from Byzantium, earlier period than what we're talking about, but you can see again where the construction details have been borrowed and some of the embroidery pieces. So this is that neckline, and it only opens down to mid-chest. So men and women were heavily decorated. It wasn't just the females, okay? And I was just in this picture, this picture's out of order in the slide, but just showing that you had the fabric decoration. This is another slide from Byzantium, very similar to what we're talking in Kievan Rus. So you have figured fabrics, we have collars, that we have bicep bands, we have decorated sleeve cuffs, very similar, and we have similar headdresses when we get there.
So quick question.
Yeah.
You said the Muscovite was where it was open all the way down the front, but not Kievan Rus. Was that also for the men? That the Kievan Rus men also didn't have it open all the way?
Yes.
Okay.
For the most part, what they have been able to pull out from the murals, some of the mosaics, and then some very few extant pieces they've been able to find, is that for some reason in between the Vikings and the Muscovites, that time period, they only opened up halfway. Now, we do know that right in the 12th century, that's when they talk about that mini ice age. So it's possible that they decided not to open up all the way because it was warmer. Also less work, right? Not to open it all the way and put then clasps or buttons or loops all the way down. I don't know. That would all be extrapolation at this point. So here is an embroidery design. And this one actually came with the details. So it's based, it's not an exact copy, on decoration of the hem of a textile found in the Ukraine. Remember, Kiev is in that what we now call Ukraine. And here's the book, Ancient Rus Life and Culture Archaeology. Okay. Here's another one. But so you'll see this design show up a lot. This right here. But this was actually found on a sword. So there was a lot of crossover of design elements from embroidery to swords to jewelry. You will see the same shapes appear again and again and again. This is also a drawing of several different headbands, but these were embroidered. So these aren't printed bands. These were bands that were then, so this is all embroidery on this band. And you can see again, here's that motif showing up in the embroidery here. And then you end up with some of the lightning bolts down on this one again. And here's more. This is one that I did on the bottom of one of my dresses, just the outline though, because embroidery is not my bag. This is all filled. This is all stem stitch or chain stitch in the original. And it's all done in gold work. Some of these were found on headbands. Some of these were found on cuffs. Some of these were found on collars. But again, you see, this is a more, has a lot of jagged edges, but this is reminiscent of that collar that they found back here. So a carry through of that motif again. Here's an extant piece from one of the museums. You can see the gold work on top of the fabric. This is probably a cuff or a collar, given that you have these buttons on the side. And actually probably a collar, because 3 buttons would not, most of the cuffs were at least 3 to 4 inches long. So that many buttons wouldn't have been enough. So here we get into printing. Okay, these are the these two examples are extant finds. And this one, they're from 2 different places. I've done both of these. Aveline, I know you've done, they're not different places. You're shaking your head no. Same place?
Sorry, I was muted. Those 2 are from Chernigov. They are from the same burial. There's a third one that's also Kiev that has never been extrapolated.
Okay. And so these are what I based my first 2 prints off of. And this is what we actually have documentation on. Now, when I was doing research for a project a couple years ago, on one of the ships, one of the Norse burials, they found a piece of fabric, a band of decorative fabric that was printed. Now, I can't find that line. It was literally one line, one sentence in a 1 research paper. And I printed it off and I took it with me to the competition. And then when they asked me about it, I could not find it for the life of me, and it disappeared into thin air. But there's one example in 1 burial in 1 ship of a printed silk textile as a decorative band in the Vikings. And
if you find that, I want to see it.
Okay. Okay. And we can see this figured fabric, right? This is from one of the murals. We can see this figured fabric, of course, because of the mural and it's a visual representation. We have no idea if this is a printed figured fabric or if this is a brocaded woven silk. The Byzantines, as we could see from those Byzantine pictures, they heavily relied on figured silks. They had silk brocades up and down. There was a lot of trade. We don't know what this is. Can we now today recreate this with a print as opposed to spending an inordinate amount of money for silk brocade fabric? Yes. Can we extrapolate that it was possible that some of these were prints and not all brocaded? Absolutely, because they existed in period. So there's nothing saying that they weren't used. This is another one of, this is another piece that is a photograph from a manuscript. You can see again, all of those brocades or figured fabrics. And then when we talk about that clothing decoration, here we go. The inside of this sleeve is a different figured fabric than the outside of that dress. Down, you have a collar here, you have a centerpiece that comes down. That is all pearls and possibly set in stones. Okay, so when we're talking about decoration, the Eastern Europeans during this time took decoration to the extreme. This is how they showed their wealth. Okay, when we look at Western Europe during the same time, they showed a lot with maybe the quality of the fabric and the quality and the weave and possibly some brocaded fabrics, but the level of decoration here, not really. There was some embroidery around collars. You might have had some stonework around collars, some pearl work around collars. The fillets might have been embroidered or decorated, but you did not get this level of decoration on the clothing itself.
Someone is asking, what level of social class are we seeing with this high amount of ornamentation?
This is actually Byzantine emperor and empress, but there is a direct correlation between what they would have worn to the princely classes in Kiev at the time. Again, this is Byzantine, but again, if you look at the murals and the mosaics, this carries through even to the Muscovites at the very high levels. And in fact, into the 18th and 19th centuries, you will see these same shapes and same types of decorations in Russian royal classes in their very formal events. And again, you see the figured fabrics here. This is a printable fabric. There's nothing on here that is incapable of being carved and printed. And this slideshow will be available. The images are saved with the file name. And if I had the place and the century, I put it in the file name. So if you go to the slideshow after it's posted probably tomorrow, then that'll be available. All right, let's talk jewelry. So if it wasn't enough that you could make your clothing itself super, super fancy, now you can add more bling. This is very early period. So remember, we talked about Kievan Rus being a geopolitical time between late 800s to mid 1200s, okay? Now, most people would probably shorten that a little on the front end, but this is very early period. So you see that these are stones, this is metalwork, and this is probably not a higher class person. The temple rings are small in this recreation. The ornamentation is probably not very costly. It's materials that would have been available to now, you also, though, wouldn't say that this is someone who is without means. If you look at her leggings, if you look at the decoration at the bottom of the skirt, there's decoration on the hem. So you have to take in the time period and then also take a look at any decoration. Someone who is beyond poor is not going to have the time or the means to have any decoration on their clothing. They might have a simple amulet, they might have simple temple rings, but they're not going to have time or money to waste on some of this decoration. Again, simple temple rings. This is another design. You can see that there's multiple temple rings here directly attached to a simple headband in descending order of size. And these are all extant pieces that were found. And you can see that they could become very small. Okay, this is a collection that was kept together. So this is this is an earlier period. Here's simple cuff bracelets, wider, smaller, very simple, just wrought wire here, a ring, twisted wire, and here's your penannular brooch. Okay, so something that you saw across Europe. This is a hammered flat one, and here are the temple rings that are specific to Novgorod. These are a 5 flat. You will also see 3s. And then these you can see are those glass beads that we usually associate with Norse women. Okay, but like I said, this is during an assimilation period. And if this is an earlier time, if this is an earlier set of decorations, then that makes sense. And on Tuesday, I said that I did not memorize all of the different tribes that had the different temple rings. Well, here they are. These are 6 of the specifics, and they are numbered. So this one here, there's 3, and then, but you can see there's 2 more hanging from that. That's Crevici, the Polonian. So this, when they say Polonian, that's getting down near, that was the tribe that became Polish. That's that, okay? 3, here's that Novgorod, and they call it Slovenian too, because you'll see. So it's very similar to these Crevici rings, okay? Oh, I'm sorry, number 3 right here. This is a set that I have. Duchess Vukasin has a similar set, but because you would also see some of these flat pieces from the Radmici and the Crevici tribes, both of us, or mine, have this, where are they, plus this piece here. So I have a amalgamation of the 2. And then these simple rings here as well. Okay, there are other ones that you will see. This is not the end all be all. These are some of the most common ones and the ones that they found as extant pieces. We also talked on Tuesday about the fact that the higher levels then, especially once they got a little bit later out of that very early period, started using Culty, which were enameled pieces, or pieces that were put together in 2 halves and possibly either engraved or enameled. And here is an example of that. These have birds every other one, and there's some other designs, and they would have hung off of this big headpiece. And you can tell the status of the people by the size of their headgear. Okay, the more height that they have and the more ornamentation that they have, the higher the rank and the higher up. So, and remember that at that time, the princely class was that high class, and then the retinue. So those would have been suspended and then hung down like this. This here, these pieces up at the top of her headdress are metal. Okay, these are metal, and they are attached either to a metal band here or to a band that has been stiffened by birch bark and then ornamented. Okay. This is a black and white drawing. These drawings do exist in color as well, but you see the same thing here. These are plaques. These are enameled plaques that then are put together onto another form. And you can see here, this would have been the prince, the very highest class of male. He's wearing very similar garments. So he has a headdress as well, and instead of a head covering that was made of cloth simply that wrapped around the head, he had what was most likely a cap that came down and then put the other piece on top of it. You can see this one is very high and pointy, but again, has that Culty hanging from it. This is an earlier set of temple rings. This is that set that I showed you on Tuesday where it was just the wire wrapped rings. And then you can also see here's another wire wrap ring for the hand, the simple bead. Some of these are the glass, but some of these are stone. So we're either looking at someone who did not have as much money, or this is probably an earlier time period. And then you also see the lunasas or lunitsas. You'll have them pronounced both ways. Here's this is more of a Culty than a temple ring per se. These would have been suspended by the other rings or the other pieces of chain. You can see the very intricate wire work there. Okay, so only very wealthy people would have been able to afford this. And then this is another variation as well. And then these are all similar from, and you can see, so this is, hold on one second, let me grab. There we go. So I said that on Tuesday, these are the ones that I wear the most. So these are just 3 pieces. I got them from Armor Castings Company in Eastern Europe. But this is the set that I had made for me. And you can see, so there's 5 flat pieces and then the dangly bits. My dangly bits are not as large as Duchess Vukasin's because I move more. And sometimes I end up signing when I have them on. And if they're down here, they irritate me. Up here, I can get away with it. But you can see that number 7 over here had the dangly bits with the rings that had the flat pieces. And so does this one up here. And that's what I based my design off of. And then Duke Eichbrander made those. Here's another set, and you can see how then they decided to illustrate how this would have been worn. So this is a torque. It's not something that you saw as much, but it is something that did show up from time to time, especially in the earlier periods. Here are those hollow Culty that I talked about. So these are 2 pieces of metal that have been hollowed out and made convex. And then they are attached together and have a filigree around the outside. And these are barrel shaped metal beads. There's actually a woman in the SCA who recreated this headdress piece by piece by piece, did exquisite work. She's in the Slavic interest group. Unfortunately, Facebook has ruined life and I don't know her SCA name. I only know her real life name. But she did excellent work and documented it every step of the way. And then this is another form. You can see that there were just many different types that were found and probably evolved over time. All right, let's talk about collars and cuffs. Collars and cuffs were, people use them to dress, right? They were interchangeable. Let's put it that way. They did not necessarily get attached to a garment. They were made to be worn like jewelry. So you can see in this very first picture, this is probably a silk backing. The embroidery is all done in golden thread, and you have pearls lining both sides. And this is an extant piece, I believe. I'm not positive. If it's not, then it's based on one of the ones that they did find. This is an extant piece. This is probably from a collar on the edge of the top of a garment. So you can see this would have been that stand-up neck that we talked about with simple round shank buttons and then loops. And that's a very interesting way to put that cording on to make those loops. And I'm going to have to remember that picture so that I can do that. But this all is done also. And you can see though, this is not embroidery. This is a woven band. Okay. So the woven bands are known at this time. Of course, we know that woven bands are from time immemorial. They have, you know, cards and rigid heddles and for ages and ages. I do know that this pattern is one that doing it on cards is possible, probably not doing it on a rigid heddle. That is not a pickup pattern. Here's another set of cuffs that is in one of the museums. You can see that they're long. They're about 5 to 6 inches long. They're embroidered, they're jeweled, they're gorgeous. And then here's the collar then that sits on top of, it would sit here. So it would cover the top of the garment and just fancy it up. Here's another one. This is from the front of a book, I believe. And this is probably later period, but the idea is still very much the same. Here's another set of cuffs. These are things I have not done for myself. These are fiddly bits that do not get done. All right, and now to talk about, and I mean, the cuffs.
Back on that picture.
Yes.
How would you attach them with the loops on both sides of the cuffs?
They would have been laced.
Okay, thanks.
In fact, I think Valia's set, Valia, I can't see you right now, so I'm not sure, but I think so. Our household member Valia made a set of gorgeous cuffs because she's more talented than I am, and hers, I believe, laced.
Yep, mine are laced. I didn't know it was period though, so I'm really happy to see that.
Look, you did it right. All right, necklaces. So I have my two that I wear. They're probably not completely period, but I've seen so many different variations that who knows. This is just some sets of ornaments that they have found. These are all metal pieces. So you will see, so this right here, in the Norse culture, you saw a lot of hammers, right? The Thor's hammers. Well, the gods, of course, the pantheon of gods was slightly different. They were very closely related, but they were slightly different. And so the equivalent to Thor in the Slavic cultures was Perun, and that is his axe. And that was the male symbol that was used, as opposed to this symbol here, which tended to be a women's symbol because it represented the moon. Okay. And here are those beads. So we can see that some of these look like they are metal beads. Some of these are definitely glass that have different, patterns in them. This looks to be a metal barrel bead. We've even seen these, right? They're fairly easy to find, even at a craft store, or at least a facsimile of them. And here are those Loonies again. So all different variations. Some of them had a third piece that came down like this. You have a cross here. So they're all different variations depending on where and when they were found, but they're all applicable to what we do. So having some variation is completely within scope for us, and we don't have to worry so much about, well, that doesn't look exactly like this. Well, neither did theirs. Here's another piece. You can see these are all metallic, or at least appear to be metallic, or potentially glass. I don't know. These look to be stone or metal though, definitely. So
I'm gonna say the glass ones actually appear to be like some of the ones that were found in Norse lands that are metallic embedded in glass.
Perfect.
And so it's like metallic foil.
And so so you definitely have a glass or stone bead here. You're right, because up here you can see where some of the foiling appears to have chipped off or come off on it. So, and I'm not sure where this one was found, but this is another museum piece. Other variations of the Loonies. And then bracelets. I don't do as much with my necklaces, but I love my bracelets. They keep my sleeves where they're supposed to be. Okay. So we talked on Tuesday a little bit about the fact, and this is just a stash that they put together. You can see there's variations of temple rings down here, Culty here, basic bangle bracelet, banded bracelets here, and 2 cuffs that attach, kind of like the one that I have, some rings, and then these. These are little decorative metal pieces, metal plaques that were put onto clothing and or strung onto jewelry. And here is that cuff. And like I said, you have this motif again. You can see this here. We saw it in the embroidery, and now you see it on the jewelry again. And I got lucky enough that it is very similar. Mine's much more modern, but the motifs are similar enough that it passes. And you can see it's the same design. You have a hinge on one side, and then you have a pin, the barrels cross over here, and you have a pin that goes down through them on this side to keep that clasped around your wrist. And it does a lovely job of keeping your sleeves where they are meant to be so they don't come all the way down over your hand. These are slightly earlier period, but they are hammered, probably, okay, I'm not going to guess at metals. That's probably not me. I'm guessing brass or bronze, but I don't know. Here's another one of the cuff bracelets, but you can see how fine these hinges are. They put a lot of pieces in here instead of just, mine's only 3. There's a lot of barrel hinge there. And again, you have those bird motifs that showed up on the Culty in the bracelet as well. And headdresses. Like I said, this could have been an entire topic unto itself. I don't know if you're familiar with her work. This is the woman who runs Miklagard Silk. She creates gorgeous things for herself and other people. And she created this entire thing herself. She gets the fabrics, but then she makes all of the garments and does beautiful recreations and beautiful work. But you can see in this depiction, she would have been very high class member of the royalty. We're talking about a very tall headdress here, outlined in pearls, more pearls here, figured brocaded fabrics, gold chain with elaborate Culty here as well as here, and then the very intricate metal beaded necklace. Here's another one, somewhat more simple, somewhat more reminiscent of what we would be familiar with as a 12th century fillet in Western Europe. But you can see that it's a little shorter, it flares out a little bit more, and then decorated with stones and metalwork all the way around. Again, you have the beads, these are pearls coming down from the sides with a different type of Culty at the bottom. And here's that cloak we talked about, the shape on Tuesday, where it's fairly rectangular and then could just be pinned at one side or in the center. Now, I love this picture. I love the way she does. I've seen a lot of pictures of her, and she does a fabulous representation. You can see she has a different type of temple ring here. She has 3 layers of them, and they are attached to a fabric piece that's attached to her headband. Now, we are not talking about an upper caste here, obviously. We're talking about your regular about town, right? Probably townswoman. She does have jewelry on. She does have gold colored temple rings. She has time to do embroidery on her band, but it's a little bit different. It's more probably where I play most often because, like I said, I never really take the time to do fancy clothes for myself. So I'm probably usually playing in that middle ground with linen and wools, and only on very rare occasions a set of silks. Okay. But you can see she has a very large piece of linen here that's wrapped around her head at least twice, and then the back of it is just draped over the back of that headband where it ties. And again, this is really the only place you get, or you will find most people who are using this persona having a different color stitching for their garments. And that's on the women's headdresses, and it's usually red stitching. So when you have contrasting stitching, it tends to be red. You'll see it on men's shirts and the underdresses for women as well. Here's another very elaborate headdress. You can see that this, I'm not sure what the backing is, but this, it looks like lame or foiled fabric, but this is actually all gold work embroidery, then set with stones and pearls. And then this type of hanging piece is more reminiscent of a Byzantine piece, but still entirely appropriate.
I have a question for you. That looks like a Kushnick, which is a little later period, or what period do you start seeing them where they almost look like the diadems of the Kushnicks?
It's hard to say because really the only places that you're finding some of these headdresses is on murals. So there's just a lot of extrapolation. This one it's entirely possible that it is a later period. And I'm not going to take a serious guess because I don't know. This one also could be later period. You'll see them get very, very fancy in later period. But in the book that had the colored illustrations, if you remember, there were very elaborate pieces as well. So I would defer to that information if I am able to find it, I will post it somewhere. But these for me were just basically, just examples of the beadwork that could be done, because the collars and then the centerpiece, sometimes the centerpiece is put onto the fabric itself and sometimes it's a separate piece as well, depending. This illustration is from that book that I referenced. And I believe it's that the ancient Rus book that was mentioned in that one photograph with the different pieces from the beginning of the slideshow. This is definitely supposed to be a depiction from the Kievan Rus time period. And as you can see, it is still very elaborate. But as you did say, not as much fabric in the other one. This one, in some of the depictions that I've seen, it looks to be metal. These pieces here are bent pieces of metal over a fabric backing. But then you can see the necklaces start to get very elaborate too, with the large decorated discs of metal and the enameling in the center that's very intricate because that's a human figure in that particular enameled piece. And here's the other one that I referenced. It was a black and white drawing before, and this is the colored version. So you can see this, even though this ties in the back, this is all metal work. And these plaques are then put onto that piece that ties in the back. And then you have the enameled Culty, again, the bird motif. And you can see everybody kind of has the veils going in different directions. This one is not all the way around the neck, but she has a stand-up collar on her dress. This one is very tight around the face and the neck. So is this one. You will see them, but then if we go backwards, this one's not as much. The important part here is all of the women's heads are covered and the hair is always covered. And these were two of my resources that I specifically visited their website, so I wanted to give credit. This is where I got some of those Byzantine, the Byzantine murals and mosaics. Novgorod to Three Mountains, she does a lot of good research. She has lots of resources to get into, and she also has done a lot of research on the fabric printing. So let's see. Does anyone, let's see, we have about 8 minutes left. Can I answer questions?
I have 2 questions.
Okay.
So the first one is the collars that we're seeing, the Olersnaya, what is the earliest that we're seeing those collars being worn? That's the first question.
We can find depictions of those collars all the way back to Byzantium. So, as you know, there's not a lot of extant clothing finds. So the only places we see them are in the murals and the mosaics, and we can see them in the murals and mosaics in Byzantium. And then we can also see them in the ones in the 10th century, the 11th century, and the 12th century in Kievan Rus. So I'm kind of guessing that they went all the way through, depending on the class of people, right? They weren't something you were going to see in most of the countryside, but the people who might have been visiting back and forth between the royalty, you would have seen them. And I'm guessing that while there was, so the Slavs, before there was that kind of intermingling of the Vikings coming over and then the Slavic tribes and the intermingling and the intermarrying, I'm thinking that a lot of this you weren't seeing. It was after the Kievan Rus, and I'm probably not until like the 11th century where they really started to establish a power base. Because even when the Vikings first came over, there was a lot of fracturing, there was a lot of back and forth, there was a lot of infighting between the groups. And it wasn't until a little bit later that that power really developed in Kiev and in Novgorod and built that town and built up and got enough power in one place to then get that much money and wealth that would have created the town, created the trade. And that's when you started seeing the guard going back and forth. And so once you got the guard going back and forth, then you would have seen that influence spreading from Byzantium back up to Kiev.
That makes perfect sense. Thank you. The second question I have is, and it's been probably more years than I'd like to admit, 25, 30 years since I was in college and I studied Russian. And I remembered hearing about the reason red was so important because it was something about keeping the bad spirits out. Do you know that story? And can you share that sort of?
I don't like it's one of the Slavic pagan beliefs.
Right.
I don't remember what it is exactly, but that's why you see the red embroidery, the red collars on the underdresses. You don't necessarily see it as much in the outerwear, but you definitely see it in the little embroidery around the collars of the underdresses and the under tunics of the men. But no, I'm not sure of exactly what, but yeah, it was a protection thing.
Yeah, it was basically to keep evil spirits from entering your body. So they would put it at sort of every like juncture, but I couldn't remember if there was more to that. I'm sure there is. I just couldn't remember.
I'm sure there is. I just haven't looked into it as much.
Okay, thank you.
That's about all I remember too.
A question about the sets of the cuffs and collars. is that early, mid, or late? Is those not as elaborate as some of the really late ones you showed?
I think again, it would have been similar to the collars. You still saw the collars and you saw the cuffs in some of the depictions in Byzantium, and then there probably was a gap. And then as they started to get richer, I still guess probably in the late 11th to early 12th century, but that is just a guess on my part. Because then Kievan Rus as the Mongol invasion happened in 1264, Kiev was on a downward slide and Moscow was coming up. But there was some of the things crossed over, the collars and the cuffs and the headdresses just kept going. So a lot of that was borrowed and then built upon by the Muscovites.
With what you're currently wearing, would you ever consider having the cuffs like that, or would you stay with the metal bracelets?
So with what I have on today, I would just stay with the metal because this isn't fancy enough. My silk stuff that I wear on very rare occasions, because I found out that no matter how light my silk stuff is, I still sweat too much. That's something that I would eventually build my cuffs for. But the undershirt right now is linen. This is my blanket wool. I have a little bit of just softer fabric on top. So nothing that I'm wearing right now is really rich enough that I would add the collar and the cuffs to. Any other questions? Well, I'm glad everybody came. If you do think of anything, feel free to send me a message. Like I said, all of the pictures that I used today, I stash in my Pinterest. Some of them get downloaded to the computer, but a lot don't, especially because a lot of them don't have good, solid research behind them. Some of them I know came from a book, but because they don't have an attribution, I don't like to download them and then not know where they came from. So everything is out on my Pinterest page for public view. And all of my social media is Catalina Ivania. So you can find everything that way.
Another question for you, jumping back to the tablet woven brocade, the interlaced. I don't recall, was that also 11th century, or do you know?
That's a pattern that I've seen on Norse clothing from very early, and it kind of carries through. So I can't really date that, although I can say that you don't see that stand-up collar with the buttons on Norse clothing, right? So that's where you have this Norse pattern, the tablet woven pattern, in combination with something that we know is definitely Slavic Rus influence. Does that answer your question, Scholastica? Okay. Like I said, if you have any questions or I can try to answer something for you, go ahead, shoot me a message. If not, I'm gonna say goodnight and I'm gonna go find